Welcome to the Besties Surrey Podcast. My name is Paul Deach.
I'm Marisa Heath.
Great. Now, this thing is building, Marissa. We're getting quite a lot of momentum. A lot of people messaging us, stopping us in the street that have listened to the podcast, which is fantastic.
Well, I mean, everyone who lives in Surrey knows how many good elements there are of Surrey. So I think
Yeah,
they just like hearing it being spoken about and getting the news.
yeah, absolutely. And somebody had said to me the other day, actually, said that they go all the way to Woking to that fruit and veg stall that I mentioned, I think, in our first podcast. So, yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how these things and how people connect to it. So, really good, really pleased with it. And it's a lot of fun recording them as
Yeah.
well. So, great. So, we'll stick to the format that we've agreed. And we'll first talk about the national thing and what's on your radar nationally.
Okay, so I mean, there's loads going on nationally at the moment, but I'm going to pick on something that I've just read in the paper. It's been on the news today, and it's Starmer's freebies. And you might think I'm being
Yeah.
slightly political doing that, but I know you're not that irritated by this, but I really am, and I'm irritated for a number of reasons. One, because I said pre this election that this election was whoever got into government, it was really going to count to try and rebuild that trust, and we know we have to take responsibility for the trust that's been broken over the last actually 25 years with
Yeah.
wars, the Iraq War, all of that kind of thing. It's Spence scandals, what went on with Boris Johnson and things. But Starmer's now come in, and in 2 months, we've suddenly found out he's had all these freebies, designer clothes, glasses. Some of the, I think they're taking the mick on the thing, saying that even his pants have been paid for, but who knows? And
I
basically,
bet they're red.
yeah, well, they will be red, I'm sure. But it irritates me because none of us go around getting those sorts of freedoms generally, unless you're a celebrity. And if you do, I think you have to I think there's some sort of gift declaration you have to do under tax anyway. But also, I'm even more irritated because people know I've got a bit of a penchant for nice clothes, shall we say. And I go and buy nice clothes. I save up my money, I buy them, but then I resell them on sites like Vinted or
Yeah.
eBay. These sorts of nearly new designer shops and things. And I've just found out that we're going to be taxed on that. So I've been taxed to buy the clothes in the first place, hard-earned money. And now if I sell over £1,000 on eBay or Vinted, I'll be taxed again. So I'm really irritated by the hypocrisy of this, basically. I just think once again, we're seeing an example of someone saying, I'll be almighty and moral and I'll do things differently. And they haven't done. And that's why it irritates me, whether or not you think he deserves free clothing or not. I think it's hypocritical. What do you think?
It's not so much that I think he deserves free clothing, but I think that his wife, has been thrust into this role as the Prime Minister's wife, will accompany him on a lot of international trips, representing Great Britain. And, I think it's in our interest as a nation that she looks good. We don't want her looking like not good when she's representing our country, basically. But I think what actually does irritate me, because I do have some irritation about it.
Yeah.
It's not so much the fact that his wife is getting free designer clothes. It's the hypocrisy,
Mm.
because we know, criticise the Conservatives when the Conservatives were in government for similar types of things. Yet the moment they get in, they're doing exactly the same, and
Yeah.
it's okay for them. I mean, I heard, is it West Streeting on not, is that his name, the
Yeah. Yeah.
NHS
Yeah.
minister?
Yeah.
Him on a news conference today, he managed to blag himself some free Taylor Swift tickets, and
Yeah.
he thought it was dead funny, and it's like, do you know what?
It's not funny. I mean, if you get something like that as a politician, I know it sounds a bit sort of pious and high and mighty. There are people in your constituency or area who would love those tickets, who might be really vulnerable and need and things like that. I personally think that MPs have to be squeaky clean on this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And as for her going abroad, yeah, we want her to look good. We want to be proud of our politicians, absolutely. But Carrie Simons, actually, to give Boris some credit, and I was furious about Wallpaper Gate, by the way. I didn't think that was great either. But she hired clothes to go, and you can go to shops. They're not cheap, but Reese high street shops, and get perfectly nice outfits. And you can't tell me that one of the country's leading barristers is so skint he can't buy his wife a nice dress.
Well, that's the other thing. But I was just going to make the same point about West Streeting in that you know, he will be getting a fair salary as an MP. So what do they get? About 85, 86
I
grand
think
a
they
year.
get 95 now, but he also gets his ministerial, so he'll
He'll
be on.
get a ministerial
Yeah.
special responsibility allowance. How much do you reckon that is?
I think they get 80. Don't quote me on it, but I think it's an additional 80. But they get expenses. They get things paid for, as we know. So they're
Yeah.
not out of pocket on anything. They're
He
being
can
treated,
afford,
you know.
if my wife can afford to buy Taylor Swift tickets for her and my daughter,
Yeah.
and me actually on one night, then you know, he can afford to buy them. He doesn't need to be taking free tickets. So it's the hypocrisy that's
Yeah.
you know, winds me up. Not
Agreed.
so much the fact that Starmer's wife's getting a free designer clobber, but
It's,
that's I think we've done that to death.
I mean, I'll just finish off by saying it's the whole champagne socialism again, which just makes
Yeah.
my heart sink. I don't care if I disagree with your politics, just be true to them and be straight about them. I
Yeah,
don't like hypocrisy.
I think that's right. Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing that on the national brief, and I know not a lot about this, and basically it's the Labour Party essentially weaponising the environment,
Yeah.
and you know, them coming out and saying that, you know, the environment is probably more dangerous to us and more of a threat to us than you know, terrorism, for instance. So some pretty strong language there. Now, I don't know anyone more qualified to talk about the environment than you, Marisa Heath, cabinet member of the environment at Surrey County Council, and somebody who, you know, I've come to respect as a real authority in these things. What are your views on it?
Well, I think you're being too kind, but anyway, I've got some experience in this. I think that it creates a split again with people, and it causes kind of people to get their backs up, basically using that kind of language. At the end of the day, for us to really shift into a new way of living that works with the environment, people have to come with us, and
Yeah.
it has to be something they understand and something that can work with a lifestyle. And that behavior change means buy-in broadly. So using that kind of language, I think, gets more people backs up basically, and they won't like that
That's the
comparison.
opposite effect then.
Yeah, yeah. I think it does. I mean, there will be people that are going, yes, I agree. And there are, of course, elements of the environmental impacts we have on our country and on the world that are very, very, very serious, and we need to take them seriously. But this isn't the language to use as far as I'm concerned. At the end of the day, if Labour are that serious about meeting the net zero goals and the environmental agenda, figure out how you're going to pay for it and get it done then. You know, don't kind of rile people up in this way. It's not in my view the way to do it, and when we've tried to do it, it hasn't worked on a lower local level.
I think I would agree with that. Okay, well, thank you very much on that. So now to our local brief, and you've had a bit of a busy day today.
Yep, so I started this morning. It's been an environment day continuing with that theme. So I started with the Greener Futures Partnership Group, which is all of the district and borough councils, their officers and political leads. And we tell them what Surrey's doing. We look where we can help them. We kind of try and be transparent about where we are with our work, and take them with us, and equally try and listen to what they're dealing with so that we can get involved in that. So started with that. And then I went to University of Surrey to lead the Greener Futures Board, which is a very high level strategic board made up of academics, businesses, borough again, councils, the county council, farmers. We have NFU representation, and basically we try and set a broad strategy that's sensible and can work with business and all of those institutions. And actually a shout out, I mean, I've just kind of had a go at an opposition politician, obviously Keir, not opposition as in that way, we're the opposition now, but you know,
Yeah.
someone not in the same politics as me, Keir Starmer, but Jonathan Essex, who's a Green councillor on the county council, was there. The guy always gives really constructive, helpful input. He's really decent to work with, and I really appreciate that. I really like it when someone, even if your politics differs, can try and find the places where you can meet and get things done. So it's always a pleasure having him at the meeting. He was there today. And yeah, it was all about setting out this big sort of vision for Surrey about how we're basically talking about what we think residents want us to do and how we're going to talk to residents. So we really set a vision and a pathway environmentally to reflect what they're looking for, really. So quite positive things.
Okay. Well, so on my local brief, I'm actually going to touch on something that we discussed last week, and that
Okay.
is the Surrey Heath Liberal Democrat, former leader of the Liberal Democrat group at Surrey Heath Borough Council, walking or crossing the floor to the Conservatives.
Yep.
which is a big deal locally. You know, if you live in the ward that he represents and voted for him or the Liberal Democrats
Yeah.
in the elections last year, it's a big deal to those people. I'm sure they're going to want to know why he did that. And actually, he published a press statement today
Okay.
explaining exactly why he did it.
Oh, tell. I
Um,
haven't. So tell
yeah,
me.
yeah, and actually, I met with him the other day for a drink as well, and he explained to me. And basically, the reason why he has walked the floor is that he felt that when he was leader of the leader of the Liberal Democrat group at the council, that he worked very constructively with the Conservative then administration,
Okay.
and felt that that relationship was really good, and they managed to achieve quite a lot of things, which you should do cross party,
Yeah.
you know, where you agree on stuff. And I can confirm that he did work very well with our previous leader, Alan McLafferty.
Right.
But he said that the stuff that they've been putting out about the council's finances, i.e., that the council is going to go bust in 2 or 3 years' time,
Mm.
is absolutely rubbish.
Okay.
And he's called that out, and he's been trying to get them to, you know, come clean on that, and they're
Amazing.
refusing to do it. And that is why he did it. That's why he did it, because he questions their honesty and integrity.
Right.
And I personally have to say, as a former councillor at that council, feel vindicated, because I have been complaining about the lies that the Liberal Democrats in Surrey Heath are putting out, something I've had a problem with for a long time.
Mm.
And finally, I've got some vindication. So fair play to Sashi Malvagnum, now Conservative councillor for Frimley Green. And I believe, as we're recording this right now, he's actually at a full council meeting at Surrey Heath, and apparently he's going to have some questions for the new leader of the council. So be interesting to watch that back.
Report back next week and see what he says. I mean, you know, as far as I'm concerned, there's mistruths, whatever you want to call them, manipulation of people's views on things. But saying something about a budget potentially, or a council going bust, is serious stuff to mislead people, because people will start worrying about their local area. You know, it's a big deal. So he's right
And it's damaging to the borough, because the town centre, they're trying to attract development partners because they want to regenerate it. They're trying to attract companies to occupy the retail units in the town centre.
Yeah.
And we can see, you've only got to walk through Camberley to see that, you know, it's struggling, and they're increasing the parking charges and all this sort of stuff. It's been very damaging, and like I say, I'm very happy that finally somebody has come out and put them right on it.
I hope so. I mean, Camberley Town Centre, we'll talk about that another time, but I have noticed it get worse, and parking has become even more of a problem. You know, even I question dropping off there sometimes. I used to go and use the big boots and the banks, and now I don't. So something they're not managing that town. But yeah, I won't take you down that rabbit hole, because we have an exciting guest on this week's podcast, don't we?
We do, and this week, our main subject, we're going to talk about something that is the bane of residents' lives, and that is the impact that utility companies have on our highway network in Surrey. It's something I get a lot of complaints about. I know you get a lot of complaints about, and if you listen to any other councillor anywhere in Surrey, they'll tell you that
it's a big deal. Yeah,
it's
it
a
sounds
big
like a sort
deal.
of niche subject, but actually I think when listeners hear us talk about this, they'll realise how actually many of their road woes are caused by utility companies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to introduce Jonathan Hulley now. So Jonathan, if you want to unmute and turn your camera on. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Paul. Good evening to you. And hello, Marisa. Very nice to see you again.
Now, I'm going to introduce you as Councillor Jonathan Hulley. So you are the councillor for Fox Hills, Virginia Water and Thorpe. And you're also a deputy cabinet member with responsibility for highways. Now, I know that when you were invited onto the cabinet by the leader, Tim Oliver, which we were all very excited about, you know, his first task for you was to get stuck into the utility companies and see if that is an issue that we can try and soften, if you will. So perhaps you could just introduce yourself from that point of view and what your role is there with it's the utility task force. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right, Paul. And again, good evening to all your listeners as well. Yeah, one of the first steps that I have taken since taking on this new role is to help establish a streetworks stroke Surrey County Council task force. And I sit on that task force. So there is some political oversight in terms of what the work of the task force is about, and also working alongside Surrey County officers and also utility companies who are represented in good numbers on this task force. I didn't know this until recently, but there are over 88 intervention by utility companies on our roads every single day in this county. And indeed, over a 12-month period, 32,000 holes or pipes or interventions by utility companies are made on our roads over that 12-month period. And I can only just imagine the cost to our local economy and the sheer frustration that residents must feel when they have to wait in queues to get from one place to another, caused by these utility companies digging up our roads, often with impunity. So the task force was set up to deal with this in a constructive way.
So Jonathan, somebody said to me from Highways that we rarely ever dig up our own roads. It's a rare thing. Obviously, we're there to resurface, to fix potholes, to deal with our verges, all of that kind of thing as Highways, but we don't dig up our roads. So 9 times out of 10, if you see the road being dug up, it's probably a utility company, but they don't advertise this. So often people are sent down, again, a rabbit hole of complaining to the county council saying, why are you doing these works in such a bad way or such a long-winded way? There's no workers here, you're causing mayhem, but it isn't actually the county council. What role have we got in working with the utility companies then? What's our legal responsibility?
Well, we are tasked with looking at and awarding permits to these utility companies when they come to us to ask to dig up a road, to lay a pipe or some fibre, or to deal with an issue relating to a water leak. Now, the permit system is something that we have some control over as a county council, and that is something that I'm looking at as part of my role as a cabinet member. But the bottom line is, Marisa, is that so many of these works are undertaken by utility companies who don't talk to each other very often. So you'll come to a situation where the road in question is dug up by a water company, first of all. They then seal up the road and the works are completed. And then later on that same week, sometimes, the energy company, UK Power Networks, will turn up and dig their own hole. And that is such a source of frustration. And that is something we've been looking at dealing with in the task force. So the task force really has 4 areas that it is focusing on. And we've met 3 times already, and we are meeting again for a 4th time later this month. We want to improve collaboration between the county and the different utility companies. 14 different utility companies have been sitting on this task force and have been attending our meetings. We want to get them to improve signage so that when works are carried out by a water company, for example, there are signs that make it clear that it is a water company digging up that road, and also for how long they're going to be involved in that intervention, and who to speak to if you're angry or frustrated or you don't know the answer you need as a member of the public as well. So that's something that the task force is also focused on. And then we want to work through clear lines of communication when you want to raise a concern as a member of the public. It's about escalating a concern to someone who can actually provide an answer. So that's something that we're looking at as well. And lastly, how to improve communication, and particularly joint communication between ourselves as a council and the utility companies, so that when information goes out, including social media, the person reading that information knows exactly what work is being done and for how long, and also who to complain to if there's an issue.
Okay. So just quickly, sorry, Paul,
Go ahead.
Up on the emergency issue. So I was of the view that the utility companies needed to work with the Highways Authority to kind of say, right, we've got a big development, so we're going to have to put in cable or something. So we're going to do it on week, blah, blah, blah. But then they could also use emergency. So they could come in and just say to us, Surrey County Council, we're digging up the road, it's an emergency. And that's when we lose the kind of control situation a bit, because they've got the right to do that. Now, the definition of emergency is what? I mean, they could literally have forgotten to do some works or failed to do something they could have planned for, and then they deem it an emergency. I'm quite interested in the fact that we know all the water issues. We've heard all the stuff around Thames Water for the last couple of years about,
Yes.
infrastructure breaking down and things like this. Do you think that we've got a problem with utility companies not maintaining their stuff properly, so they end up having a myriad emergencies all the time, thus causing us a load of problems on our roads and connection points?
I do think that is a real problem, Marissa. And what we've also uncovered through the work of this task force is that actually utility companies have what they describe as planned emergency works.
Right.
So they know they're going on to a particular road to carry out works, but they describe them as urgent or emergency, which means that the permit system doesn't apply in the usual way. What they can do is go into a road, dig it up, and then apply for a permit after they've been on that road. So after they've started those works, because those works are deemed to be an emergency. So one of the things I want to see is a change in the national legislation where we tighten the rules around this. We stop a situation, which I think is a trend. It's a trend across the county that I am observing, where more and more works are described as emergency in order to be able to get around the permit system, and therefore us as a council having less control over what they do. That has got to change, and I like to see national legislation addressing that very point.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Now, what I want to dig down a little bit deeper into, no pun intended, is under what circumstances can the county council or the highway authority within the county council refuse a permit? So,
Yes.
I would imagine it's a bit like planning in some respects. You can only turn down a planning application under certain conditions and for certain reasons, not just because you don't like it or you want to be awkward. So, what are the situations that where a permit can be refused?
There are some situations, Paul, where a permit can be refused, but they are very far and few in number. In my experience, the vast majority of permits that are applied for are granted by our council. And I want to understand why that is the case. That seems almost to be the default position. And so looking very carefully, and this is part of the work that I will undertake in my new role, is understanding what terms and conditions we might place on the granting of a permit. Do we properly police the timeline in relation to that permit? If the permit is granted for 7 days, then those works must be completed during that time. And if not, and if they were to apply for an extension, interrogating why they want that extension, not just simply granting that extension as a matter of course. So I want to really spend time in better understanding how we apply the permit system. And I think we should be far more robust in actually issuing those permits in such a way that makes sense, and that there are terms and conditions that are in place that speak to public convenience rather than convenience for the team who grant those permits in the first place.
And that would put pressure on, I presume, Jonathan, on utility companies to expedite. So there was a case in, I think it was Charlwood, where I was in my car and I was running out of petrol and they'd closed a road and I had to go so far round. Honestly, it was like about 6 miles diversion. I had to actually stop at a farmer and ask for some diesel in the end because I was going to die in my car. But I just thought, these poor people living around here that are having to add 5 miles onto their journey to get to the local shop and things. This is mad. But not only that, I went there a few times and I never saw anyone actually working there, which was even more infuriating. I was just like, how long are they going to take with this? How long do these residents, what, a month, 6 weeks? How long is it going to go on for? So we should be able to sort of pin that kind of thing down. And the more inconvenience it causes to residents, the more pressure we know to focus on that utility company to hurry the hell up and get it done.
No, I mean, that's absolutely right. There's nothing more frustrating than approaching the street work and seeing that there is a 3, 4, 5 mile diversion route. What the task force did do when it met for the second time was to ask questions of the utility companies present. And what they do is they take a very, very clear position on the health and safety of their workers in deciding whether or not to close a road in order to carry out those works, or whether you can get away with a multi-traffic light system where actually the traffic can inch their way through. The default position is that if there's any possibility of workmen in the road being in danger, they will close the road. And that is the legal position that they all adopt with the support of the team at Surrey County Council.
Do you think we're slightly risk averse on that, Jonathan?
I think that is the
anyone
case.
in danger, but are we being a bit heavy-handed?
I think it is a risk averse approach, but I absolutely appreciate that you don't want to put your workmen who are working on that street in any danger. So the issue is then the diversion routes, and what the task force is looking at is how to improve diversion, and that is making sure the public are aware of that diversion route well before the works even start. Because there's nothing more frustrating, is there, than turning up and seeing for the very first time that you have a 5 mile diversion that you need to navigate. That's just not acceptable. So the task force is looking at how to improve communication so that we and the public are aware of what options there are, including what other diversion routes that might be available before they get to that stop point. And that is something that the task force is looking at. The other thing, Marisa, is that I do think that when it comes to looking at how we could do things better and differently, there is something around what the national legislation provides. I think that we should look to see whether there isn't a opportunity to bear down on utility companies who spend too long carrying out the works that they may have been given permission to undertake in the first place. So, for example, they don't carry out works on bank holidays. They don't carry out work on weekends, which means that the permit granted for 7 days is actually really for longer, because 7 days don't include, or do include, the Saturday and the Sunday, but they don't do any work on the Saturday and Sunday. So actually it's for a 9-day period. And I'm not sure that is right. I think that the 7-day period should be 7 days, including weekends. And if they don't complete those works, there should be a fine system in place that is meaningful.
So there's been a really good example recently. So in Dorking, around the High Street, there was a sinkhole in West Street, and it was quite a serious problem for Thames Water. And originally they said it's going to take months. I think they were sort of saying we're going to open the High Street again in either October or November. But actually Surrey County Council worked with them and they said, okay, we can get it done by the end of Surrey. So it kind of went by the end of September. So it kind of went from being this sort of 6 to 8 week job to suddenly a 2-week job. Now, part of that might be because they investigated it more and thought it's not as bad as we thought, but also it just showed when we put the pressure on, because we were being blamed for the gridlock in the high street, and the businesses were all saying this is our livelihoods, people can't get here anymore. It wasn't our fault. We had to put traffic measures on because of this sinkhole, but it was a good example of how, if you work together, you can get it sort of changed and the window shortened. So Surrey County Council and Thames Water pulled their socks up there and really delivered something that's much more amenable to local people and businesses. It can be done.
It can be done. And let me stress that utility companies who have been participating in this task force have been very positive in constructive in their approach. They have already volunteered the fact that planned emergency works exist, and they've also volunteered to share that information with us, so that we can work better together. And in other areas as well, we've set up a separate committee to look at how we improve communication on works that need to start and for how long. And a joint committee under the chairmanship of one of our senior officers will be meeting on that soon. The other thing, Marisa, that the task force is looking at is around what we describe as GIS mapping. So there are opportunities for members of the public to go online and see what works are being carried out on a particular street.
Is that available now, Jonathan, or something?
It is available through the
One
Network app. That's right. But guess what's missing from that app?
What?
Not all the information on works being planned by all the utility companies. So one of the things that the task force has identified is that our own mapping or data information network has over 100 layers of information that relate to the work that we as a county council are doing. So this is where we're looking to improve a road surface or provide a new pavement to a road in a particular community, but really very little about what the energy company or the water company might be wanting to do.
Okay.
The UK Power Network have their own tool that sets out the work that they are planning to do. But why don't we bring them together so that there's one place where the public can see all the works that are being planned and they can know in advance as to the detail of that? And that may even help the companies themselves better coordinate the work that they want to undertake. So that's something else that the task force is looking at.
Okay, so I want to now go on to something which I know is a concern to a lot of residents. It's certainly a concern to me, as in Deepcut Bridge Road, we've just had environmental improvement works on highway improvement works of the road, the pavements, new cycle lanes put in, beautiful, smooth new road. And my number one concern is that very soon a utility company is going to come and dig it up and leave a horrible scar there. And we know that the moment you break that surface and you compromise the structural integrity of that road, that then you more or less half its life, and it then becomes much more susceptible to potholes and all that type of thing. So my question to you is the task force looking at how utility companies reinstate their works? Because I can see many examples locally of where that's been done to a substandard situation, which means that, you know, it then becomes potholes, and then the county council's highways team have to come and repair it. Can we get them back to do a proper job is my first question. But also where they've clearly left a scar there, is there something we can do to get them to resurface rather than just repair?
Yes, is a short answer, Paul. The task force can look at that, and what we have done when we have met is that we have put on the table various case studies of where things haven't gone the way we want them to go. And I've taken the opportunity at least twice to challenge a particular utility company on the quality of the works that were undertaken by them. And that has then been fed through, and they've undertaken to look at that again. But that's really their goodwill, which of course the task force has been designed to generate. The real problem is that there's no law that requires them to take those steps. That's where the inadequacy lies. So, for example, that the warranty that a utility provider has to give as to the quality of the works, the reinstatement works, is currently only for a 2-year period. So if they hold for 24 months and then start to crumble away, that warranty no longer applies. Let's see it extended to 5 years. And that's certainly been one of the asks that we have put to government when we wrote to them last November.
I think that would be a sensible way forward, because at least then, if there's a 5-year guarantee on it, they're more likely to do it right properly the first time.
And the other thing, absolutely, the other thing is temporary reinstatement. So, you know, currently what has to happen is that if the works are urgent, they will undertake temporary works, and then they have to come back to make sure that those intervention works are made good more permanently. Now, the period within which they have to come back is 6 months. So they have 6 months to come back to the
2
work
months.
they did, which could well be substandard. I would like to see that reduced to 3 months. So
Yeah,
they
I
come
agree.
back to the scene of the crime, so to speak, quicker. But that's something that requires national legislation changes.
But ideally, Jonathan, as soon as you damage the integrity of a new surface, which ultimately is paid for by taxpayers, the people listening to this podcast, you have damaged it and it's never going to be quite the same, right? It is a scar, as you say. Ultimately, we just don't want them going into roads if they don't need to. So that involves better planning. But you've already covered this. But I was once told that Japan had a model whereby if one utility company needed to do some works, and they're much better there at planning their work, so they don't get into emergency situations because they've got a proper plan, then they had to consult with all of the other utility companies and say to them, we're going in to dig up the water. Hey, Mr. Gasman and Mr. Cableman and things, what do you need to do? And they'd check their plans and say, well, we were going to go in there in a year or something, but we'll bring it forward. And the law actually makes them go in. So if they miss that opportunity, they can't go back in unless it was a mega emergency. So there's actually national legislation. So that would allow us to plan. So if we know gas, cable and water are all going in, say Egham Hill, A30 Egham Hill, it's a nightmare because it's been dug up so much for Royal Holloway University. It's like going on the moon now. So do we want to spend all the money resurfacing that next month? They need to have it dug up 20 times more. If we knew all the utility companies were finished by January 2025, we'd plan our resurfacing for January 2025, wouldn't we? And everything would be lovely for a long period of time. Is that not a route that we should be pursuing? Is that not something that national government should be considering?
Absolutely, Marisa. I agree with you entirely. That is something that we need to look at. It's very interesting that what has come out of the task force is that whilst these different utility providers are keen to talk to each other and to us to better coordinate the timing of works, there isn't any law that requires them to do so. In fact, one of the things we've discovered is that the regulators, and there are a number of regulators that are in play here, incentivize the utility companies that they regulate to carry out works as quickly as possible, and they are marked, they scored according to how quickly they remediate. The effect of that is that water company A, who of course are regulated by Ofwat, will focus on carrying out those works as quickly as possible. And the energy provider, on the other hand, with their own regulator, will be under the same sort of pressure. So the problem you see there is that they're both racing to intervene together, which is just not sensible and workable, in my view.
Okay. Well, this is a fascinating discussion, and I'm pretty sure we could go on about it all night. But I did promise my Facebook followers that, because I did put on there last night that we would be recording this podcast with you today, and I asked them if there's any questions they wanted to ask. Now, you have actually touched on the things that the questions that they've asked. I'm going to read them out. Perhaps if you can give a brief answer. So this is from David, and I'm also going to read out a response that somebody else had done to David, a guy called Andy. I'll read that out as well. But is there any way that the utility companies could be made to work together? If there is a need to dig up Finley High Street for gas repairs, for instance, could they circulate that all the other utility companies and see if there's any other works that could be planned that might reduce some disruption to pretty much what Marisa has just said? And then Andy responded and said, "You're living a fantasy. I worked in construction for many years, and I can tell you right now that nothing in their planning has any logic. Things get started ad hoc, as there are usually too many parties involved in every project. It would be an absolute nightmare to coordinate works across various companies." Now, I have to say, when I was listening to you talk earlier, Jonathan, to play a little bit of devil's advocate with the utility companies, I think we do have to recognise and understand that logistically, to get two companies with their own contractors and their own program of works, with different skill sets and all the rest of it, factoring all that in and then getting them to meet in the middle has got to be, from their point of view, a logistical nightmare. So how would you respond to David's question there?
Well, I would echo Marisa's comment, and that is it works in other countries. Better coordination by the utility companies working in partnership with local authorities happens and is practiced successfully elsewhere. You know, Japan is an example of it. So I do think that working together is an objective that we should work towards. Why not? Let's think and act positively on this front. There are lots of parties involved. That's absolutely right. I mean, each utility company will have their own contractor who then may subcontract elements of the work. So trying to coordinate and even police is no easy task, but it's doable. And I think it's doable, A, through technology, and B, through the local authority having the will to police, and national legislation allowing or providing the tools to the local authority to police.
And strengthening that permit scheme.
And strengthening the permit system,
Yeah.
effectively defining emergency to the point where most works aren't actually emergencies, which means the permit system applies. We can then put into play terms and conditions, apply terms and conditions that are sensible, commercial, but also speak to public concerns, and then police them. And that's very, very important as well. But the task force has seen 14 different utility companies sit around the table with us. They are willing to cooperate. And you know what? That mapping tool, where all the different works that each company wants to carry out, all put and found in one place, that should facilitate better coordination, in my view.
Okay. Well, I think that it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Joining us. You're our first guest, and we're really pleased that you joined us this evening. Now, we're going to move on to the next segment of our podcast, and actually, we'd like to keep you on, and perhaps you can contribute to this, and that is what we call Surrey Discovery. So that is, Marisa and I do get around the county quite a lot in our respective cabinet roles at Surrey County Council, but also in our day-to-day, within my business, I get around Surrey a lot, and so does Marisa, and therefore discover quite a lot on our journeys, and that's what this segment is all about. So we'll give you some time to think about it, Jonathan, because we've put you on the spot. I'm going to ask Marisa to give her Surrey Discovery first. I will do mine, and then we'll bring you in, Jonathan. So go ahead, Marisa.
Actually, I'm changing from my original one. I'm going to mention this company called Cubitt Antiques, Cubbit, and they basically got a warehouse in Bagshot that is like a treasure trove. I mean, this place is bizarre. It's next to the co-op, and it's really hidden away. You call them and you get an appointment, you just wander around. They're like two really friendly sort of geezers who don't put any pressure on you. They're really nice and cool guys. And there's just everything in this place, and from every price range to like thousands. I don't think they keep it there, so I'm not sort of promoting theft here or anything to go in, but they can showcase all these things that are mega, and then they've got more affordable things from a couple of £100 and stuff. But what they do is they go and clear out old stately homes, amazing buildings, homes of the very, very wealthy who've left them or whatever. I don't know where they get the stuff from, but all sorts of places. At one point, they cleared out some sort of 1980s club and had all of these amazing sort of bar stools that in animal print, and they'd had the whole sort of bathrooms done with like mock croc sinks and everything. And they were selling those. So you can get the most strange things, but the most beautiful things as well in this place. It's really worth anyone who's into that or looking at furnishing their home popping across and meeting these guys and seeing what they've got. So it's Cubitt Antiques. It's a London business actually, but it's got its warehouse in Bagshot.
Oh, I'm going to check that out because I visit Bagshot
Really
a
cool.
lot. So I'm going to go and check that out for sure. So my Surrey Discovery this week is, so I visit Woking a lot. I have a couple of clients in Woking. I cycle there along the Basingstoke Canal every single week to visit one of my clients. And coming home, I generally sort of stop off in the town centre there, maybe to grab a sandwich or something off the fruit and veg stall or whatever it may be. And I did exactly that last week when I visited Woking. And where I stopped my bike to put my helmet on before I went to go back onto the Basingstoke Canal and cycle home, I noticed a plaque on the wall that I'd never spotted before. And I'm getting goose pimples thinking about this now, actually, because as a young boy growing up in Manchester, I was an army cadet. And I belonged, my army cadet detachment belonged to the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. And when I was in the cadets, they used to sort of really hammer home the history of the regiment and its founding regiments. And one of those regiments was the Lancashire Fusiliers. And I always remember from those history lessons that we got, because, you know, you talk to any soldier of any British Army regiment, they will be able to tell you all the battle honours and the history of their regiment and all the rest of it. And they talk about that with a lot of pride. And the Lancashire Fusiliers was no different. And one of their biggest campaigns where they suffered very heavy losses was Gallipoli. I think they had over 1,000 soldiers jump off the landing craft onto the beach there at Gallipoli, and I think only just over 300 survived. And famously, they won 6 VCs, Victoria Crosses, at the Battle of Gallipoli, just from the landing alone. And the famous thing is they were awarded these VCs before breakfast. So the very next day after the battle, they were awarded these VCs. And I spotted on this plaque that and if you go on my Facebook page, I've posted a link to it and a photo of Captain Richard Willis, Lancashire Fusiliers, and Victoria Cross holder, and there's a little sort of dedication to him there. And I thought, Lancashire Fusiliers, why is that here in Woking? And it turns out that Captain Richard Willis was born in Woking, and that is their tribute to him. So I was really pleased to see that. And as soon as I got home, I did a lot of research on Captain Willis. He was a remarkable man by all accounts. So I'd recommend that people look him up. There's plenty online from him. But I think the moral to the story is that the Army Cadets, or any of the cadet corps, whether it's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Royal Marine Cadets, or the Combined Cadet Forces, which are the schools cadets, you know, I credit the Army Cadets of leading me away from a path of juvenile delinquency without any shadow of a doubt. I was an absolute nightmare in my teens, as anyone who knew me back then will tell you. I was a rough child, let's say. And I'm pretty sure, had I not discovered the Army Cadets, I think my life would have taken a different turn. And it's thanks to the learning about the military history of some of these remarkable people and these role models that I think I credit certainly how my life has turned out to the Army Cadets. So that's the sort of moral to that. And if you have any children that you think could probably do with some strong mentorship in their life, I would definitely recommend any of the cadets, whether it's the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Royal Marines, or the Combined Cadet Forces. And there's probably one in every town or village in the country. Certainly, I know there's a lot in Surrey.
That was a deep discovery this week then, Paul.
Yeah, it was a bit
shallow at mine, but
honestly, and as a result of that post as well, one of those positive role models in my life, my colonel in the Army Cadets, who I'm still friends with to this day. He was awarded an MBE recently for his services to the Army Cadets. Nice. Saw the post, and he's invited me, actually, because there's a new museum opened in Bury, which is where the Fusiliers are based. The Royal Regiment of Fusiliers are based over there in the northwest, and he is one of the sort of trustees of the museum. So he's offered me a personal tour around the museum when I go back to Manchester next. So I'm very happy about that.
Really nice. Okay, well, Jonathan, what's your discovery of the week?
Well, Marisa, that's very, very difficult to follow on from. That's, that's a very impressive little intervention from Paul there. But mine has to be the Virginia Water Lake.
Oh, yes.
Near Egham. And I'm a frequent visitor to the lake. It's a beautiful space. And of course, as we approach autumn, the colours of the leaves on the trees will start to change and change the whole atmosphere and ambience of that very, very special place. There's also a cafe right by the entrance, and it's a brilliant place to sit down, just reflect, just to essentially take it all in, enjoy coffee, and then start your walk. And the thing about the Virginia Water Lake is that, you know, it is a good 6 miles to walk around the lake. And, you know, you've done your exercise if you can make it. And so you need to be fortified with a good cup of coffee from that lovely cafe as you walk into the entrance there. But it is a brilliant place. It is a community space that is second to none, in my view. Very lucky to be living very close to it. And when I'm not playing my part, doing my very best for my community and, of course, for the county, you'll find me there, and I love it.
Yeah, no, it is a beautiful place. I know it well, so I think that's a good spot. We've been it's north of the county, isn't it? I'm rubbish at my sense of direction. We've been
Northwest, it's northwest
yeah,
Runnymede, so yeah,
we've
it's
been a
right.
bit
Yeah.
northwest focused on this week's likes, so we'll try and go to the other parts of Surrey for next week's likes. But just before we finish, Paul, I just wanted to touch on next week's podcast, because we're going to do something a bit different next week, aren't we? We're going to be discussing the theme, Surrey, is it the new Hollywood? So it's going to be a bit of a different one, a bit more glamorous, shall we say, than maybe utility companies and potholes. But nonetheless, I've enjoyed today's conversation. I've learned things that I didn't know before. And I think it's something that is actually really significant to our residents in Surrey. And I think they'll be pleased to know work's happening to try and resolve this.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do a search on Facebook for Councillor Jonathan Hulley, I know that Jonathan posts on his Facebook page quite a lot about his exploits with the utility task group. So make sure you follow Jonathan. And if there's any significant updates, I know he will give them to us and we will share them with our own respective followers. So both of you, thank you very much. What a great podcast. Very interesting. And I'm really looking forward to next week. So thank you very much.
Thanks. See you next week.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.